So I'm ready to get started with this horticulture hour. Are y'all ready to get started with this horticulture hour?
Let's make this happen.
For sure.
Let's make this happen. So we do have a question right off the bat. Carolyn asks, is it too late to divide plants and replant them in the garden or a pot? Side note, which is better? And specifically, north wind grass and larger grasses, hellebores and daylilies.
Okay, that's a great one. I've been ripping apart the perennial border. So I've been digging and dividing things the last couple weeks. In particular, I have done some grasses. Grasses are great, especially your northwind grass is actually going to be a warm season grass, so it's just coming out of sleep right now, and perfect time to divide it and easy to divide it. Or actually, if you have a shovel, it's going to cut right through it, no big deal there. You said hellebores. It is. If you had listened to my talk a couple weeks ago, we're getting on the late side for the hellebore, so you could probably still do it if you want to or have to at this time of year. What were some of the other things that specifically? Daily. Oh, you can do a daily. 365 days a year, I think. And you can leave them out at the ground and abuse them, and they will not die. It's fine and dandy. Put them right back in the ground if you have the ability to do that. But if you have to do any of these in containers, except for probably the hellebore might not like to be in a container, but it doesn't have to be. But the grass, the daylilies, they won't care at all. Most of your herbaceous plants that are starting to come up right now, this is a great time to divide them as they're coming into active growth. That's why the hellebore is not quite the best time for it, is because it's starting to slow down for the season. It's been active all winter, and now it's going to slow down. Well, those other things that are going to be summer active, those are. This is a perfect time to divide them. Anybody?
There was a question about whether to put them in containers or back into the ground. I guess it depends on the end goal for them.
Yeah.
If you're looking to fill it out and spread them out, put them right back in the ground. If you're looking to give them away, put them into pots. Less stress is always better. So the shorter they're out of the ground, the better.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. All right, we got another question from Carolyn.
Can I ask about asters?
Oh, yeah, go for it. What do you got?
Asters would be perfectly fine, too.
Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I think you're going through that, and Mark always says, I'll say it since Mark's not here today, but it's less about when is like a good time to do it, and for your dividing something, assuming you've got a decent amount of it, it's when you've got time to do it.
Yeah.
When you're doing it.
Right now, it might be less traumatic to the plant,
Yes.
I think.
And also, like Tim was saying, especially if they're going into containers, they're going into active growth. They're going to fill out that pot with roots, so they're taking in nutrients, water, doing what they need to do.
Beautiful. Sounds good. Okay, Carolyn asked another question. The best way to cut back juncus, do you try to trim out old growth or just to the ground? And same for liriope.
For me, I will let it go a few years with juncus. It depends on the species too. Some are better evergreens than others. For one, we have one called juncus. I think it's effusus. No. Oh, it's Javelin's the cultivar. It's a tall growing one. It dies back more for me in the winter than, say, another one that we have called Blue Arrow. But after a few years, Blue Arrow will kind of look really crappy, and I will just cut it back if I have to. But now's a good time to do that because they're going to start coming again into active growth and reflush real quickly. And it kind of mimics a periodic fire is the way I look at it that might go through a marsh and wetland area. So...
Yeah, you can't. It's hard to hurt them, and I think they they benefit from, usually they don't need anything, and then the tips start to look bad, like Tim said, and then you can cut them back pretty hard. Liriope, you can't hurt liriope. Yeah. You could have done that several weeks ago. Some people do use hand clippers. I used to run over mine with lawnmowers. That's much easier to do. String line trimmers are a good way to get it under control. But you really can't hurt it. And right now is actually kind of late.
You're starting to have the new growth. You will damage the new growth, anything that's pushing up right now. But you won't
damage
okay.
it much.
No.
Yeah, it depends on the setting. Like if Keith was saying use a lawnmower or a string trimmer, that's good in like a mass planting. Right. But like where I used to work, we had it, like clumps of it. And those I would go through and hand cut just to make sure we had nice, just to make sure they flushed well.
Okay, great, wonderful. All right, so we got another question. Somebody says, hi, transplanted a lot of ferns last fall, Christmas fern, shield fern, sensitive fern, and they have not started coming in yet. She's wondering if the leaves maybe smothered them, or do you have any idea what she might have done wrong?
Sensitive fern shouldn't even be up yet.
Okay.
It's sensitive to cold. You have something?
Are they inside or outside?
Outside, probably.
These are outside. The Christmas fern, it should just be pushing up new crow's ears now. And what was the shield fern? Again, it would just be pushing new crow's ears now.
They're about
if you did it.
Ferns are about the only thing that are playing nice right now in terms of when they should be coming up. So the ones here in the garden are just starting to send up those little fiddleheads, or what did you call them? Crow's ear. I like that.
I like that too. Is that just the same thing as a fiddlehead? I've never
It
heard
is.
that before.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're just coming up now. I have sensitive fern in my garden just coming up. Just this morning, I noticed it. for the
Okay.
first time.
If it was up last week, it probably got frozen.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So someone's asking, how, besides very carefully, do you clean leaves and pine straw out of wood lilies like yucca, nolina, and agave?
We have a volunteer who has really long tweezers, and you have a set of volunteers come in and do it instead of yourself.
Okay, but that's an interesting idea. Really long tweezers.
Yes,
Very- I was going to say,
to some extent.
you can get a lot of stuff out with a blower. Try to
Get it from the base.
Get it from
Yeah.
the base, like a small handheld
A real
one you
small
put
hand rake. Yeah.
right at the base. Yeah, a really fine. I've seen garden rakes that are like with handles on them with 3 or 4 tines. Those are good to pull stuff out.
In the automotive section of any tool place, there'll be really long needle nose pliers that are like this long,
Yeah,
and you can really get them pretty far in.
that's an option. We had gloves that you wear pruning roses with high cuffs on them. Those are a good thing to have too, because they're going to draw some blood, even if you're being super careful. It's just the nature of dealing with those.
And eye protection too, if you're going to have your face near the darn thing.
That's probably the most important take home is, yes, definitely put on some kind of safety glass, because you're going to be bending into the plant and you're going to get frustrated, and that's you don't want to do that. That's
And
a
your
good
attention
point.
is going to be down, and
And
the
you
leaf
don't
might
see
be
it real
there,
close.
and you might not even see it till it's
If you're on a blood thinner, you might want to avoid taking it that day.
Let's not give out medical advice.
No medical advice here.
It's still a good tip.
No, yes.
Okay. Actually, before we go on to another question, I'm noticing y'all have brought out some lovely little plants here. Would you like to tell us briefly about
If
some
there
of
are
them?
any questions,
There are questions, but
we should probably answer questions.
No,
Okay.
okay, I'll start since
Okay, she's gonna go.
Tim's trying to. I got this. I didn't know anything about it until we went and looked in the nursery, because everything in the nursery is even farther along than outside. So Greg looked at this and said, "That's not even supposed to be blooming yet." But this is a rhododendron Arnson.
Yep.
Arson's
gem.
Arson's gem. I just got it because it was pretty, but I looked it up. It's supposed to be a compact, deciduous azalea that's fragrant. I don't smell a lot on it, but
Fragrant. I think because it was in such a hot house, it's not that fragrant.
yeah.
It's verticillium wilt resistant, which is a big deal in the rhododendron world. And the small compact size. A lot of the deciduous azaleas get kind of tall and leggy, and I think there's a series of these, if I'm not mistaken, and they stay kind of compact. I'm catching a whiff of something. It might be something else here, but it's blooming a little bit early. And all these things are things that kind of caught our eye in the greenhouse this morning.
okay. Well, thank you. So, a question. Someone says, I have a dwarf magnolia grandiflora that turned brown this winter/spring. It has started putting on some green growth. Have you ever heard of this? Planted last spring in 8A and C.
How cold did it get there, wherever they're at?
In 8A.
It sounds like cold damage.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me.
And if you're in an area where they don't traditionally do well, Nothing suffers the cold quite like a southern magnolia, and the leaves will definitely turn brown. I would wait to do anything and give it some time to maybe rejuvenate and hopefully flush out. I'm not sure what dwarf one you're speaking of. Little Gem, but it's not dwarf. There's a Cocoa is one that stays kind of small, but it sounds definitely like winter burn, and that would not be uncommon with the weather that we've had. That cold snap in December.
Yeah, she says same temperatures as Raleigh. So
yeah, it sounds like cold damage, but I would wait to prune to do anything to see.
Or the leaves sticking would be the other thing.
Exactly.
If the leaves that are totally brown and hanging on, that's not a good sign. But if they've been brown and fallen off, that's a good sign. It's going to come into new flush.
And some magnolias will drop interior leaves at certain times of the year. I always will get questions about that, when that would happen. If that's a pretty common thing.
I'd like to expand on that a little too. With other plants, not just magnolias.
Funny you mentioned that, because somebody says that their gardenia had the exact same thing happen to it.
Sure, yeah. So, there's going to be a lot of browning on different things, tips of things or whatever are going to have winter damage. And now is not the time to think about pulling the whole plant out of the ground and getting rid of it. You want to wait, it depends on the plant. Wait till May or June or July and make that decision that, did the winter really kill it or really damage it so much you need to get rid of it. Just be patient with those things. A lot of that damage will kind of be healed over or grown over by the time you really need to make a decision.
Yeah, I'll just echo what he's saying, in that stuff's that if it's getting some green, is what Blake said, some greens. Yes. It's trying. You just got to give it some time. It's still early. We're ahead, but it's early.
And everybody this time of year, everybody's biting their fingernails over some plant or another in their garden. I've got a handful in my garden that I do this every year for, and every year I'm like, oh, is it coming back? Is it? I'm poking it and whatever. And yes, it's going to be fine probably.
Okay, so I missed something during the introduction. I should introduce all of you as well.
Wow.
Jeez Louise, that should have been on our list. So, okay, immediately here to my left, I assume, well, y'all just said he was on the left. I'm very confused by directionality right now, but this is Dennis. He's our curator. We adore him. And there's Tim Alderton. He's our research technician. You know him. Next to Tim is...
We adore him too.
Yes.
Greg.
He's our director of horticulture. We're still on the fence on whether or not we adore him. He's too new yet,
Close.
but
He's going to need at least 6 more months.
At least.
Definitely, at least.
Still on probation.
And then, of course, y'all
8
know
months.
Sophia. She's our nursery technician, and we all adore her as well. So, yeah, wonderful. Great. I am so sorry that I didn't introduce you.
Hey.
Every day we get a little bit better at this, so next time.
It's all good.
It's all good. Okay, next question. Is it time to feed blueberries, raspberry, blackberry bushes?
Not my realm, unfortunately.
Oh, jeez.
Blueberries like kind of an acidic organic mix. And most people that are taking care of those are following some kind of guidelines for fertilizer, but I'm not real familiar with the blackberries or the raspberries.
I'm not familiar either, but there's really good extension websites, whether you're here in North Carolina or where I'm from in Pennsylvania, that cover all those fruit, those small fruits in particular. I hate to say it, do an internet search.
Yeah, you'll literally find month by month guides for all the different fruits broken out by fruit.
Do an internet search is safe, but make sure you're looking at an EDU website, like NCSU. Like if you're here, even if you're not here in North Carolina, NCSU EDU, they have an extension section, and you can find so much information there, and they do have guides.
Sure. Okay. Well, somebody's also asking, is it too late to fertilize daffodils? So maybe we can talk briefly on fertilizing generally at this time of year.
They don't really need a lot of fertilizer. They get all they need from the organic matter in the ground. More crucial than fertilizer is not cutting the foliage back once the flowers are done, is let that foliage build the bulb's resources back up. Don't tie them in pretty little bows. Don't wrap them up with string. let them do their thing naturally and kind of flatten out on the ground. And when they're kind of yellow and more withered and brown, they're easier to clean up and they pull right off from the bulb, but they really need that time to rebuild their reserves from producing such a big flower.
If there isn't too much there and you don't have anything in their place, I hate to say, just throw some mulch over top the leaves once they've died down, and the nutrients in those leaves will go back in the ground. That's part of the fertilizer there too. They're recycling themselves annually normally in the wild.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you. So, new question. How about cutting back American Beautyberry, and how much?
How small do you want it? They grow a lot in a year. If I try in the garden, just to get where I have one that we have, it's real close to a path, I cut it back to about a foot each year. If I don't, it'll be 8 feet tall and it'll be out in the path. You can, if you want a big one, you can let it go if you have the space. But if you have a spot that you need it to not take over, I would give it a hard pruning. Just make sure you cut it to just above nodes, so where the new buds are, and it'll flush right back out.
Tim jumped in on that one. I was going to say something, but yeah, just it depends on how big you want it. Cut it above a node. You can take it back pretty hard. They set their flowers on new wood, so you don't have to worry about cutting flowers off at this time of year. Because it'll come out on the flush that's about to come up.
And if you cut it back, it's also at a level you can see it instead of if it's 8 to 10 feet up, you can see the fruit real well.
And if you have the room, you don't have to cut them back at all.
Exactly.
But they can take the pruning. You can do it every other year. There's some different species that are nicer, bigger, but every other year is kind of a good guideline if you're not sure.
Assuming they're established.
Yes.
Assuming they've been in and are well established.
Don't cut off that 6-inch tall one.
For sure. Okay. Someone's asking, I have a 9 bark in tree form. New growth is coming up from the base, but the top of the tree appears dead. I've scraped a limb and do not see any green. Should I wait to see if the top blooms?
Go ahead.
I don't know. I don't know if those 9 barks are grafted or not.
I don't think they are. That also, you can cut those back every so often. Again,
Physocarpus.
Again, established, not ones that were just planted. There's some dwarf ones. You're not going to hurt, if you already know that foliage is dead, you're not going to hurt it by pruning it now. Maybe cut down to live wood, or if you want to cut all the old stuff and just leave the new shoots that are coming up, that's perfectly acceptable also. They're generally a pretty tough plant, and it's going to be hard to hurt those as well.
For me, I don't think you're going to have that standard back. In the wild, from what I've seen them grow in the wild, they often are in riparian areas along streams and stuff. They arch over and root in. The original plant dies out and their secondary plants form and root in, and that perpetuates them as much as by seed. So they sometimes are, you can keep on pruning them. They sometimes don't last forever. Let's say they're short-lived because they want to move.
Yeah, they're short-lived. I've noticed that in the landscape. They're not going to last 20, 30 years. And you brought up a point that I didn't think about. If it's a standard, we've got a trunk and then the plant on the top. I don't know. I can't imagine what they would graft that on.
I don't know.
It would have to be the same thing.
One time, but we ripped it out when we were building the new pathway, and I wasn't upset. Needless to say.
Okay. So the next question, it's part a question and part an attack on the Arboretum, really. But they say, is there a treatment for chestnut blight in live oak trees? The 2 at the entrance have it, and the 1 at the east is getting worse.
It's not chestnut blight that's in the live oaks. No. We've had those tested and looked at. Some of it is there was some stress when lines were put in near it, and just age. Those are old trees. They've been in a pretty urbanized area, and that additional stress has caused them not to look so good. We're in the process of we've just taken some soil samples from the 2 at the pedestrian entrance, and we're going to do some plant health care things to them in the next month or 2 to try to extend their life. They are a living thing. They're eventually going to die. The stress of where they are has maybe shortened their life a little bit, and we're going to do the best that we can can to try to make them last longer. One of them tested positive for Phytophthora. It's a live oak. They're used to being in wet soil. The Phytophthora is just there because the tree is stressed out and it's not going to kill the plant, but it wasn't chestnut blight that was in those.
Well answered, Greg. I like that. Okay, so someone says, never had enough sun to try a puntio, but now I do. Brought home some freebies from Plant Delights. One plant has a whole new leaf and new growth tufts. The other has reddish burgundy tufts. When I started to pull out a pad that looked dead on the first, I found there were roots, so I left it alone. Is this a good idea or a bad idea? The reddish tufts, how to tell which is a flower and which is a new pad?
Sure, yeah. So with a puncha, I used to have one, and I used to work at Plant Delights and worked with theirs. You can basically break off one of those pads and throw it on the ground wherever you want to plant. They're very tough. You don't need to worry about it not transplanting well. It's going to transplant. If most people, to be neat, will tuck it into the ground a little bit and stand it up, but you don't even really have to do that. And you could even cut the pads like in half and let the cut dry for a while, like a few days or a week or something, and then plant that up as well. Sure. So new pads will be bright green or a lively green color, and the buds, well, we can't really pan around, but all the cactus buds do have some sort of tint to them. That's and they're rounder.
So the flower buds have the tint.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so those are actually, they're not the what we call probably called leaves or pads. Those are actually modified stems. So there's, like you were saying, it's a stem cutting. You can slice it and dice it in numerous ways, and there's buds all over or nodes all over that thing. But yeah, and what you're seeing, the new growth, there is actually true leaves on there. They look like little aw-shaped things. They're just pointy little things. They're soft, they're rubbery. Those are the first true leaves, and you'll have those around the pads as well, and the flower buds. And like you're saying, the flower buds are typically, at least on the flat type of punches, the pad's going to be flat, and the flower buds, if they're going to have them, it's a little early for them, though they could start forming, are going to actually be round, totally round when you look at them from the top down. So it's a little bit different.
Okay.
It's subtle difference at this time of the year. It'll be a few weeks till you can really tell the difference.
Sure. Okay, someone asked a question. For someone who has no experience gardening, what would be the best place to start? Resources.
Extension.
Yeah. We had somebody drop a link for the extension website in the chat, for sure. Extension's a good place.
Yeah, assuming you have a space, a yard,
for sure.
Wherever you can, just try
twice
something.
a year, we have a program here called Gardening in the South, and is geared just for beginners. Now it's not like 101 where we go over every one basic gardening topic at every Gardening in the South. But we do cover basic beginner gardener type things, lectures at every one. And then, there's a lot of great books.
Sure.
When I first started gardening, I actually got the Southern Living Gardener's Manual or Plant Manual. I forget what the actual real title is, but that's a real good book. It's got a lot of specifics in it about gardening.
Definitely. We've also got a really wonderful volunteer program here at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, and you don't have to know anything about plants. We'll give you a task and let you at it, and there will be other volunteers there who would want nothing more.
Clean out that apuncha for me and that yucca.
Here's some chopsticks.
But it's a great community of people that are incredibly knowledgeable about plants. All of our volunteers love plants and have loved plants for many, many years. So you'll get to rub elbows with people that know a lot and have a lot of experience while getting a chance to get some experience for your own self and getting a lot of inspiration for your own garden. Yeah.
I was going to kind of say that.
Yeah.
Go through your neighborhood. That house has a really nice yard. Maybe I should meet those people.
If you do, like if you're new and you have a yard and a space, take a soil sample.
Yeah.
That's a good task, but there's good guides online.
Tell them how to do that. What site to go to.
I don't know the site offhand.
There's through the extension service, there's you can find that information.
Yeah.
That's going to give you everything you're going to do in your garden is determined by the soil, how much organic matter it has, what the pH is, whether it's alkaline or acidic. Plants are going to adapt to that. They're going to thrive or die. So that's always a good place to start, is wherever you're going to garden, take a soil sample. And you can go online, NC State, look that up, and they'll give you the blow-by-blow instructions on how to do that. Another good resource is join a garden club. There are a lot of local ones. The Rock Garden Society, we do a lot of stuff with. That's not just rock garden plants. Gardeners of Wake County is a really good one. There are Raleigh Garden Club. There's a ton of them. Wherever you're at, come visit us and ask us questions in the garden. If you can stop us and make us slow down, and find us, we're happy to interact and help you get on your way with what you're doing.
And every county in the state, or at least all the all the ones that have a decent population will have a county extension office where you can call them up and say, I need some soil sample boxes, and they can either get them for you or tell you where to find them. I know some of your local garden centers will have the soil sample boxes. They'll just have some around to give to people who are interested. And then the boxes will have the information on them on how to take the soil sample and where to send it and what to do with it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And local garden centers are always full of really good information, really nice people. And there's a lot that we've done stuff with. Just go visit them and tell them what you're wanting to do and your level of experience.
Yeah. And somebody did post a link to the extension websites in the chat, and I'll be sure to put those links in the description of this YouTube video. Okay. So, next question. Is there a rule of thumb to help determine if a plant blooms on old or new wood if I wasn't observant enough when it was blooming?
There really isn't. It's learning about the plants that you plant, making sure it's going in the right place, and all those kinds of cultural things. When you've been working around plants, you can look at things and you know that that's a plant, because of the cultural stuff, that blooms on new wood, that blooms on old wood. But that comes from time and learning and those sorts of things. Reading books, searching the web, all that kind of stuff. But there really isn't just a general, you look at something and you can say that's something that's going to do that.
Sometimes it comes with age. The plant, it might be something that blooms on new or old wood, yes, but it might be that plant has to be 10 years old or something. It has to be settled in there, matured. It has to be established and have before it will actually flower and fruit, for instance. So,
a good place, I guess it's a rule of thumb. Don't count on it because it might not be accurate all the time. But when does it bloom? Does it bloom? Yeah. Does it have leaves when it blooms? If it does not have leaves when it blooms, it is old wood. If it has leaves and it's blooming towards the top, it's new wood. If it has leaves but it's not blooming but it's blooming like more inside, that's old wood.
That's amazing, Sophia. I think you're spot on with that. But
yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
It's like we were going too deep.
But for every rule of thumb, there are things that like Tim was saying, some things will take 10 years before they're going to bloom. So it doesn't really matter if it's old or new wood if you have to wait 10 years. If you're looking for it, it's not going to be there for 10 years.
You have to be old before it flowers.
Yeah.
Okay, new question. Please explain center dieback of some dogwoods. How much should you remove?
I don't know of a specific thing that's called center dieback.
Okay.
A lot of times when you see the top of a plant die or interior stuff, there's something going on with the root system. Dogwoods are very sensitive about how you plant them. They don't like to be planted too deep. So if you plant a dogwood too deep, it's going to cause a lot of those kind of cultural issues. If you're talking about some of the shrubby dogwoods, they get some canker diseases and some twig diseases, and they are a plant that benefit from being cut back every other year or so. But I don't know of a specific thing called center dieback. I know there are a lot of Dogwoods are very susceptible to powdery mildew. They're very susceptible to verticillium, which is a wilt disease. They can get if I top their root rot issues, and that'll cause some upper branches to kind of die back. But usually when you see that in a tree, there's something that's not quite right with the root system.
Okay, that's good info. Yeah, I hadn't heard anything about center dieback, but it certainly sounds like. Anyway,
That sounds like a common name for something.
Sure.
Or like a general descriptor, but
Yeah.
not necessarily a pathogen.
sure, totally. Okay, someone says, by some sort of accident, some grapevine cuttings I took are starting to bud. Should I wait until next winter to plant them in the ground?
Do they have roots?
Presumably. He said he took cuttings of them.
If they have roots, I would feel fine to plant them this summer.
Yeah, assuming they have a good root ball, like, if they're in pot, like maybe pop them up and let them fill out a little bit, and then plant them.
Grapes are
Well, yeah, as long as it's not so small that you don't see it and you trample it, that's what happens sometimes with small things. But grapes and their relatives tend to be rampant. Might not hurt to trample on it a little bit.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions that are in the chat right now, but we're only 35 minutes into this horticulture hour. So okay, there's one starting to come in, but let's give them a moment to ask a few more questions. And maybe, Greg, what's that you got? What's that you're looking at there?
So I'm not ashamed to say I'm a big fan of barberries and things in that family of plants. They're relatively tough. There are some ones that are invasive, and I'm not promoting those. And this is one that our friend and colleague, Tom Rainey, and his folks at the Mountain Horticulture Research Station have developed. This is Burbisonburgii Sunjoy Orange Pillar. So I'm also a sucker for things that grow upright, and this is an upright growing barberry. And it gets that name from that bright color. And you can see on some of the as the leaves mature, they turn kind of this orangey, sun glow color. It has thorns on it like barberries do, which I don't think deer eat this.
Typically, no. It's a noxious weed in some states.
It is. It's an invasive, and that leads to one of the things that they tried to do at Martin Horticulture were breed ones that were sterile. This is a sterile one. It's not going to seed in. It's not going to become a weed. It's not going to spread around. So it doesn't have those genetics from its relatives in it that cause it to spread around. This is going to stay in your garden. It's not going to spread around. So ultimate height in this, 3 to 4, maybe probably 4 feet is a stretch, and won't get much wider than 2 to 3 feet. It'll shoot some crazy branches that make it less fastigiate, less upright, and the best way to take care of those is with a pair of pruners. This barberries in general can take pruning, but you want this one to grow upright and kind of do its thing. So I like things that grow upright. I like bright colors in my garden. I actually have 2 good size of these in my garden in Charlotte because I like that bright flash of color that it provides throughout the growing season. The other nice thing about barberries is they have really good fall color, and this also doesn't disappoint in the fall color regime. So this is one that I recommend. They're in the trade. They're pretty easy to find, and there isn't a bad plant that hasn't come out of the Mountain Horticulture Research Station. They're wizards there. They're doing some really good work.
Do you know? I mean, in some states, I'm from Pennsylvania, and I know they have now banned Thunbergii. So, and this is a Thunbergii. So, do you know if this is still able to be grown or sold there?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
Because if it is a sterile selection,
it is a sterile selection, but that is a good point. I know. In Illinois, you can't plant this anymore because it's in the woods everywhere there, and I've seen it in the Delaware Valley, in some places where it's escaped further north. But this is a sterile one.
And could you repeat the name of the cultivar?
It's Sunjoy Orange Pillar.
that's the trade name.
Trade name. The name. Should I even say it?
Yeah, you can say it.
Give it your best shot.
NCBT3.
Oh, wow.
So it's North Carolina Burbisonburg 3
Yeah.
Okay.
is what it translates to.
Nice.
That's secret knowledge.
Yeah.
Only people from here know that.
That's the cultivar name.
Okay, so we've got a question. Someone had a fat cetera in a former garden that was about 4 foot by 3 foot in dry shade under a deciduous tree, but now it gets some shade in the AM, but gets direct sun for a good portion of the day, and it's now more like 3 foot by 2.5 feet, and it has browning on it as well. They're asking, should they move it to someplace shadier, give it fertilizer, talk to it sweetly, what?
When did it turn brown?
Oh gosh.
Was there? Did
Is that
something?
during the cold spell?
Did you? They said it sounds like the sun timing changed. Did something happen?
That's a good question. Carolyn, would you be willing to unmute yourself and give us a bit more detail?
Because I wonder if it turned brown, say this winter.
We are prone to.
They will
I don't
get
think that's my question. I'm Carolyn, but I don't think that's my question.
Oh, excuse me. Excuse me. No, you're right. It's Bandy. Bandy.
Oh,
Yes, tis I. Yeah,
Here-
it's
here you go.
okay.
Okay.
the sun is.
So where's it at, Bandy? Did it get that damage this winter?
It was that way before. It's been
Oh.
sort of becoming shorter and uglier. Slowly.
Your garden's only a couple years old. When did you plant that? And did it grow to that size and then tie back then? Or did it start out that big when you bought it and planted it?
It started out that big when I transplanted it.
Transplanted. Okay. So it could just be reestablishing, but it could also be the light. But you don't have excessive sun. I know Vandy's garden since Vandy. Anyway,
The new one you don't know well enough. You have to come to
Yeah.
it.
But your soil is also not the greatest, if I remember correctly.
Tim's like, I feel like
Wow.
Tim's. I feel like we could Tim would just have people like just tell
Your
his fortunes just like
your soil is awfully heavy clay, and that could be part of it too. I don't know. Where's it at? Is it over near the garage, or is it over near the sun porch, or
Garage. The two
near
garages.
the garage? Okay.
If it's near the garage,
Yeah, it is pretty heavy clay over in that range, but okay. That's just some thoughts. Being that you transplanted it there because that was was that in the old garden?
Yes.
Okay.
You recently moved.
Yes.
It was in the front yard. It's never been happy about being moved. Right.
Okay, because they're generally pretty. I mean, aside from winter damage, they're very resilient plants. I think
the theme that we're trying to convey to folks is wait and see.
Yeah.
Is be patient. If it's newly transplanted, it could be a couple years
in the
before
last 4 years
it gets happy where it is. If it's in bad soil, it might be kind of a slow decline. And it could just be, one bad winter after a bad winter after a bad summer or a bad spring. And also, it's your garden. So if it's succeeded your threshold of tolerance and it's not performing as you like, it might be time for you to move it. I'm trying to be polite.
Yeah.
It might be time for it to go bye-bye.
Yeah. Or take a cutting, Vandy, if you can't resist throwing it away.
And it always helps to
It's
talk
easy.
nicely to your plants. That's never not a bad thing.
Oh,
You're right. It's had bad winters and bad droughts and poor thing, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
I'd wait and see. I'd wait and
Take-
see what it does. And you should bring a leaf in for Tim to look at.
She's had me over. But take a cutting of it. It's an ivy relative. It's a half ivy. It's not hard to root. So take a cutting and you might try it somewhere else.
Okay.
Or even grow it just in a pot on your deck.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Bandy.
Thanks, Vandy.
Okay, next question. My eastern redbuds are scrawny, year 2, and each literally has only about 30 blossoms this spring. I bought 3 and 1 died. Ideas on how to help them come around. I have done a tea compost.
Patience. And how were they when you bought them? Were they bare root or were they well established in a pot?
It's hard to say without that factor. Plant quality matters before you put stuff into the ground. tea compost isn't going to do a lot. If it's tea compost that you bought, chances are you just used a dark colored liquid to water your plant in. Mulching with good organic matter is important. We use leaf compost here, and that's one of the best things that you can do. 3 to 4 inches, not around the root collar. Planting depth is important. If you planted them too deep, they're going to kind of suffer. Are they in full blasted sun? Are they in heavy clay? Are they getting too much water? We talked about soil testing earlier. That would be a thing that I would do is test the soil around them, see what nutrients are available before you put fertilizer to them. And again, it might be if they've only been in the ground for a couple years, they need time to get established and kind of used to their environment.
Are they a cultivar?
Are they seedlings? Are they cultivars? Were they bare root? Were they container? All those factors make a huge difference in how well they're going to perform in a garden situation.
Yeah, there's that old garden saying, first they sleep, then they creep, then they leap. That really applies more to perennials, but trees too. And if there's any kind of stress on the plant, that sleep, creep, leap isn't 3 years, it's 4 years or 5 years or something.
And if they are seedling Redbuds, that's Denny Werner's other breeding programs. 2 years is not long time for them if they're grown from seed, to be flowering. Unless they're really being pushed, it's going to be a 3 to 5 year, and that's just to get them starting to flower, and then they start to build off of that, and you'll get bigger, more flowering. The first one, like I said, it's hard to tell what you started with, but it doesn't surprise me that you may have lost 1 out of 3, especially if they were maybe smallish. But it doesn't. I wouldn't worry too much.
As long as there are buds, and because the leaves, they're one that are blooming before they have leaves. So blooms, I don't feel like really is a indicator of plant health. And again, they're young, so they're young and they've been stressed, so they're not going to put a lot of work into, unless they're dying. Yes. They're probably not going to put a lot of work into flowering until they reestablish.
That's a good point.
It's a very good point, Sophia. Wonderful. Okay. So, to establish a low hedge, 2 foot tall, which buxus would you recommend and how closely spaced on center?
There are too many.
How long do you want to wait to grow to?
None of them.
Geez, that's an opinion.
There's some good ones, and there's some merit to boxwoods in a garden. They're deer resistant. They can take shade or sun. They're pretty soil tolerant. There's a whole host of new ones that are out now that are more disease resistant. There's a lot of boxwood concern with diseases. And it's one of those things, it's the cultural stuff you do to boxwoods that really make them behave not so nicely. So I would get one that doesn't require a lot of pruning. There's one called Unraveled. That's one of my favorites. It's more unruly looking, but that's kind of a nice one. There's a whole Chicagoland Grows series that are really tough, different sizes. Yeah. If you go online, Saunders Brothers Nursery, they did a whole boxwood evaluation that was, I think, 10 or 12 years long. We were a part of it. The Ralston was a part of it. I was a part of it at a garden that I worked at. And they looked at almost every cultivar of boxwood, and they based it on fastigiate, low-growing, large ones, rounded ones. That's a good resource to look for ones that perform well. And most of them that you buy at a garden center, all that information on what they're good for is going to be on there. Graham Blandy is one that's used a lot for an edge. I'll think of 100 of them when we get off the call, but I would go to the Saunders Brothers website and look for their boxwood evaluation, and it's going to have all that information there, more than you probably ever wanted to know about boxwoods.
There is also an American Boxwood Society that has a nice website, and they will have every cultivar under the sun and probably a lot of opinions on which ones are good and which ones are not. You can also in the South consider other species other than boxwood. The dwarf Ilex vomitoria, and there's plenty of other tiny little shrubs that you can prune into a hedge down south.
In all the spacing, that all depends on what you choose to plant. So it's hard to give a generalization on that.
And how often you want to, if you want a sheared hedge, how often you want to shear it?
Or how long you want to live till it fills in. Because I have the wonderful little, we have my favorite little boxwood is one that we selected here, and it's super slow growing. Emerald gumdrop. But you won't find that anywhere.
Awesome.
Maybe on the plant cart.
Okay.
Still, you have to wait forever for it to get bigger than a few inches.
You can make a fairy garden hedge.
Hi, this is Suzanne Edney. How are you? About hedges, I've learned that you need to make a continuous root run for a hedge, not plant them in separate holes, because you can't be sure that all of the soil that's going along where you want that hedge is the same.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing that, Suzanne.
Yeah, and that kind of goes along with you don't prepare the hole, you prepare the bed. You worry more about the whole garden bed than an individual hole.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah. Okay. New question. Best way to prune red twig and other colored twig dogwoods. Should I keep cutting off branch tips to make a better show of the color in the fall?
That's a plant that benefits from at least every other year or every third year. You can cut them down to the ground, and you're going to get the brighter color coming up from those new shoots, not the tips, the whole thing down to the ground. If you don't want to be that extreme, you can cut the bigger ones out, the more mature ones, with hand pruners, selectively go in all the way to the ground, and the younger ones are going to have brighter color. If you don't do anything to them, you'll still have the color, but they'll start to get more barkish down on the older parts of the stems, and the color will be up on the tips. But every 2 to 3 years, it's not a bad idea to cut those back. I have found through experience that a lot of the colored twig dogwoods, not all of them, but a lot of them will get cankers that turn the stems black, and the ones that we cut back every couple years didn't have as much of an issue with that. So I think by cutting them back, the disease doesn't have time to get into the plant and cycle through its cycle to cause a lot of damage. So there's that benefit of pruning them also.
Awesome. Okay, this next question, I'll be really excited to see if we can answer it. Someone says, what is the little blue iris that runs all over the place?
It's flowering right now?
I assume as such.
I'm guessing Iris japonica.
Beautiful.
So yeah, that one, I say it likes it in the shade, if it's the one I'm thinking about. And I say it's a vampire. It will not grow in the sun. So if you want to control it, just give it more sun. But
Is that the one in Asian Valley right now?
Yes, we have one.
Big patch.
Skirt chasers is one that we have actually in the Asian Valley right now. A common one is Echo Easter, but it will grow like crazy. It's a very vigorous ground covering little iris.
Sure. From what I've heard, it runs all over the place.
Yes.
Is that a bad thing?
If you want a ground cover.
And they're very easy to pull up. If you just pull right out of the ground, they don't root in very tightly.
Yeah, it is actually relatively easy to maintain.
Awesome.
But it can get ugly if we have a hard winter. Not flower well.
Sure. Okay, when can a large fatsia be moved successfully?
Going back to what Sophia said, that Mark said when he said it to us, when you have time, it's all about the cultural follow through.
Sure.
If you move it in the dead of summer, you're going to have to give it more water. You're going to have to make sure it gets mulch. Ideally, now as it's starting to emerge and flush out and the roots are starting to do their thing, or in the fall when they go dormant. Fall, as I always tell people, is the best time to transplant things because the plant's going dormant. It's not going to need as much water because the temperatures are going to be cooler. The sun's going to be less harsh and more forgiving. But you still have to pay attention to cultural things, not as much so in the fall. So fall is ideal, but our busy lifestyles dictate you may have to do it whenever. Fall, first choice, spring, and then whenever you have time, but be sure it gets water. You're planting it right. It's getting mulch and you're keeping a closer eye on it. Don't go on vacation for 3 months and expect it to be alive if you do it in the middle of June or August.
Unless it's something really special, I would start from scratch.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to start from a couple gallon plant instead of having to struggle with a big one.
Fatsias are common and they're not terribly expensive.
Sure.
They sell them as house plants.
I got
down
one
here.
you can grab.
If it is, I would like to say,
I'll give it to you. Well, you can buy it off the plant card.
I would like to say, if it really is a special plant, you can do it in 2 steps, really. In the autumn, you can go around the root ball and just break the root ball loose. That will induce a flush of growth in the roots. You leave it over the winter and then come back in the spring after it's had a flush of roots. You can pop it out of the ground and move it with a lot greater success. That's how they harvest bonsai trees in Japan that have been growing in the ground for over 50 years with darn near 100% success rate getting them transplanted. You go in the autumn, you go around the root ball, and then you go in spring and actually excavate it.
That's a really good point. When you're moving big, mature trees, I worked on a project where they were building a new building on the campus of Swarthmore College and moved these gigantic caliper maples. And we went around and did that for exactly the same reason. It's called root pruning, just to get the root system to kind of flush out so that when you do come back and move it, it's got all that new root growth starting and kind of gives it a kickstart. But that's a good point.
And I was thinking with a Fatsia, that's probably a really good idea, but do it in the fall. The root pruning in the fall. And then right now, actually, I think would be a real good time because if we have a hard winter, at least here, if this is in the Raleigh area, they can get damaged even in a normal winter here. If you go out to the coast, they grow like weeds. But it might give you a little bit, less likely to lose it due to cold damage than after a late moving in the season, that is. And that sounds like a really good option.
Awesome. Okay. New question. If I'm doing a deep raised bed, can I use manure and worm castings, or is there something better?
I would use it as an amendment, but I wouldn't just solely use that.
You said raised bed?
Yeah.
Raised bed. Yeah, deep raised bed.
Manure and worm castings tend to be really heavy and get really soggy. So you want something to aerate. You want some kind of bigger aggregate to
Pine bark vines are great.
Pine bark. That's what we plant in here is pine bark. So it's sold as soil conditioner.
Add some things like permatil, which is something we use here.
Yes, they like permatil.
The fines which is kind of a sandy type material, and actually sand wouldn't be bad. It's gonna be something stable. Your manure and your worm castings are gonna break down their organic matter. You need something that's gonna be stable, that's gonna be there for long term instead of as well as that organic matter. That's great, but you need something that's gonna be there structurally for long term.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Yeah, in a deep raised bed, all that organic matter, you're going to plant your plants and they're going to be level with the top. And then as the summer goes on, the plants are going to sink down and down and down. And then by the end of the summer, they're going to be a foot below the edge of the deep raised bed.
Okay, something to consider for sure. Okay, we are starting to run a little long on time. Okay, and I'll tell you, Karen, I'm looking at your question. Can I separate a Fatsia now in the spring as I relocate it? Pretty much what we were just saying about that applies there. So we have one last question. Pamela says, I'm so sorry I joined in late. Have you talked about pruning? Pruning butterfly bushes, beautyberries, wildgelias, lantanas, and of course, roses.
We talked about the calicarpa already, the beautyberry, which is really, you can do a hard pruning on it. And butterfly bush, very similar treatment on that. Roses, just depends on how you want to treat them. You can be hard on them or you can be fairly easy on them. But
ours are almost completely leafed out and have flower buds on them.
And I pruned them hard this year.
They're way ahead. That's a January, February thing.
Yeah, I was going to say roses
it's a little late.
Tend to do in the...
Wait until they harden off again. And then you can do a late spring, or that is early summer, midsummer pruning on them, and they'll be fine. They're not too hard. What else was there? Weigela. I would do them after they flower.
Yeah.
Yeah. At this point.
Yeah. And because if you prune them now, you're going to be cutting flower buds off because they tend to flower most in the spring and early.
There's a couple here that have flowered.
Yeah. So,
the Budley, I'd probably take back to like a
It depends
I mean,
on what it
depends
is.
It depends on what it is and how you want it to look.
Yeah.
But if it's one of the big bushy ones, you can take them back pretty hard.
Yeah,
cut
1 to
them
2
big.
feet
1
on
to 2
one of
feet.
those,
Yeah.
and you can go 6 or 8 inches on some of the new dwarf ones if you want. Just cut them back to actively growing nodes where you see new shoots.
Lantana was the
And
other.
lantana, it's probably dead to the ground if it's around here, and you just chop it off at the ground.
Great. Okay. So that's all the time we have time for. Thank you so much, Dennis, Tim, Greg, Sophia, for being our wonderful panel of horticulturists. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in this week and giving us questions so we had stuff to talk about. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you will join us next week for our midweek program. We have on the calendar that Tim and Sophia will be doing, what month? Is it going to be? It's going to be April. April gardening tasks, and that is going to happen. It will be April gardening tasks. So I hope you all will join us next week at that for 3. So next week at 3 for that. Thank you, Blake. Okay.
You got
Thanks,
it, man.
y'all. We got it.
You got it.
We got
Y'all
it.
take care.